What can we do about it? It's being done.
Yeah.
First of all, religion is on the decline. The nuns, the NONEs.
Here in the United States.
Yeah. Worldwide as well in some demographics, but this whole thing about religion got what they wanted, they got power and everything else. Right now, there are people who are convinced that things are as bad as they could be. And normally I would recommend they read like Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature and stuff, but there are people who poo-poo all that. As far as I'm concerned, I'm living in the best of all times ever. That seems redundant. But the thing that strikes me is that there's a backlash. There's a backlash particularly from bigots who used to be in a position where they could push people around and exercise control. And what they're seeing as their religions lose control over individuals and as society changes and we learn more is that they're not as able to do that as they were. And so now you're getting louder voices, more violent voices, or more violent people in part of this. It doesn't mean the situation's worse. It's smaller pockets of people, and it is, from my perspective, like the last flailing gasps of the dragon.
Well, like a desperate animal, yeah.
And I look at that as positive because the data show that things are improving and that the power that rested with particular groups of hateful people is diminishing. I know it doesn't always feel like that.
Prepare yourself because you're about to get a ton of emails from people telling you why the world needs to be burned to the ground and we have to start over from square one.
I get it, and I know how they got there, and they're not entirely wrong. And if you take nothing else away, because we're not digging in on this topic, there's too many other calls.
Not enough hours in the day.
The solution to most everything is better education. But one thing that happened towards the end of the 19th century, there were people who their view on religion was, we've solved that problem. Let the little peons keep their religion and we'll stick with science. And it created this break between public perceptions of intellectuals. It also set us back because those people were not on watch for what could happen. So in the 1950s, that's all of a sudden when we get the McCarthy era stuff and the national motto of the United States changes from E pluribus unum to In God We Trust. It's when they start slapping it on the money in 1954. That backlash is because people did not continue to put pressure towards a more secular world. You have to be vigilant, not vigilantes. I'm fine with violence when it's warranted. I'm fine with
qualify that for me.
Rebellion,
like as violence against
violence
you?
with regard to self-defense. We've sorted through this. I don't know why some people find that it's particularly difficult. By and large,
I didn't mean to derail you.
Yeah, no, and this was where we weren't going to go, but we will for a minute. For me, the question is, okay, when is violence justified? Well, first of all, it's situational. In defense of yourself, in defense of others, I'm fine with that. Well, how long do I have to wait back? Does the fist have to be here? Does it have to be here? Does it have to be here? What point? And that's not always an easy question to answer, but we strive for making sure that we have an imminent threat or clear and present danger, and that while almost everybody can empathize with the sort of vigilante justice that goes on if you're the parent of a child who was murdered by someone, we understand that person's desire to seek vengeance. There's a reason we don't allow it, and it's because that vengeance isn't justice. People make mistakes, people lie. There needs to be due process to make sure that everybody's rights are protected, and we go that way. Oh, well, you're just saying you can sit around and talk everybody out of everything. No, I'm not.
Or you want to hold hands with the enemy and that kind of thing. Yeah.
I recognize that there are people whose minds are probably never going to be changed. And yet just before the show, I got an example of this, which I posted to Facebook. There was a show, it was Wife Swap or Trading Spouses or something along those lines, from 10 or more years ago, where there was a woman on there who was the God warrior, and she became all kinds of memes, and she was screechy, they're all dark-sided, and everybody made fun of her. And she was like the poster girl for religious fear and, in a slight way, bigotry. And there was an article that I posted. I wish I had it to share. You can hit up my Facebook page to find it. It's from a gay news source in the UK. She's now an LGBT ally, has been seen, at events, and people have talked to her, and she's raising flags. She's fundamentally changed who she is. I don't know if she's given up religious belief or not. I didn't dig in beyond that. I don't know how much of her life has changed, but it's absolute confirmation that people can and do change their minds. Some of us who've been involved in this for decades already knew that because we get email on a regular basis like, oh my gosh, I had this weird belief or that weird belief.
Both of us were reasoned out of an unreasonable faith.
Yeah, I mean, we're walking, talking proof as
where things get
Christian radio.
Sticky, though, is, and not sticky for me, but what I usually hear in return is the protest that, well, language is violence. So
no, it's not.
The violence in return is actually an act of self-defense.
Yeah.
And
I get it.
I understand the power of language. I mean, we're both professional communicators.
The type of language that I would say comes closest to violence is the language that's already prohibited. You can't incite a riot. You can't. I mean, Charles Manson essentially went to jail for sending other people to kill someone, but his conviction was for murder. And I may or not. I'm not a lawyer. I may or may be wrong on this, but I don't think the felony murder rule is in effect. I've always been under the impression that he was kind of railroaded a bit. Wait a minute. Before the email comes in, it's like, Matt doesn't think Charles Manson should have been in prison.
Look forward to
I'm talking about a very
headlines,
persnickety legal point. The guy, we were definitely better off with him in jail, and so was he, up until he died. But now there's a felony murder rule, so that if you are an instigator or participant or even the getaway driver in something where somebody is otherwise convicted of murder, you can now do that. I'm fine with that. We've done a lot to make sure that our laws are fair and just, to make sure that we are not running around, with, ad hoc posses put together, not by law enforcement, but by me and you. Let's go out and we're going to run this guy out on a rail.
Subjectively deciding which words are violence, right? I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, and there are people who I vehemently agree with that, hey, this is the right issue. This is the right stance on the right issue.
It's the right stance, yes.
And yet
we disagree on tactics.
Right. And that's it. But you often can't talk about that, as I found out the other day. And for all the people who are at this point cringing or wanting to say, yep, that's what we expected from Seth and Matt, whatever else, I know there's probably nothing I can say right now that's going to necessarily affect this, but just because somebody disagrees with the method that you're willing to do doesn't mean they're an enemy of yours. And if you continue to alienate people just because they are not 100% in line with you, but you only got 98% of me, Seth. You're not as superhero as I am.
Why are we so eager to turn allies or potential allies into enemies? I think our value systems are often the same. We want a better world. We want a more just.
Hey, do you want full equality for the LGBTQ community?
Absolutely.
Ditto.
So we're on the same page. We may disagree though on tactics, and I just resist these purity tests that are in place that say that if you do not advocate violence, like a mob violence kind of a thing, a proactive mob violence, then you are essentially an enabler of the enemy. I just reject those types. It's almost a dogmatic religious model where
the argument is essentially that those of us who would disagree are just waiting too long. And the people who are acting early are terrified of what happens if you wait too long. And I want to say I completely understand with that. I can empathize. I'm not going to shit on the people who are saying and doing this. I haven't lived their lives and I don't have their frustration. I just don't agree with the tactics that some people are using. And so now that we've spent all that time on a subject we weren't going to go to,
well, I don't know. Have you guys encountered, I mean, like looking at the audience, I mean, you can't see their hands. Show of hands. I mean, have you guys engaged in some of this? Like, have you seen some of the polarization
you can't see any of their hands. Nobody raised.
It's mostly for me. I'm just looking. I see a lot of head nodding.